We were always together. It was always Andrew and Ruth, Ruth and Andrew. So we were just that happily married couple. All of our married life, he had a model railway, but that grew a lot bigger once he'd retired. In fact, we actually converted the loft to hold the model railway. He did a lot of photography. So actually there aren't an awful lot of photos of him because he was nearly always behind the lens taking the photos. How would I describe him? Kind, very loving, impatient, inquisitive, and quite studious. He was always around to ask advice. Didn't always take his advice, but he was always there as a sounding board. I miss the times when you can just talk about things that are happening in the family. I kind of miss him, you know, at the end of the day where you kind of putting the day to bed. You know, this happened, that happened, we're going to do whatever tomorrow. It's just that his presence. He was diagnosed in May 2011, but that was following a whole series of visits to the doctor. He'd suffered from erectile dysfunction. He'd suffered from what he thought were urine infections, and then he suffered from a really bad back. But at none of those doctor visits was a PSA test suggested. Nobody ever put two and two together and said, let's do a PSA test, until the bad back got so bad that the physiotherapist he'd been going to try and cure it said, this is not right, you need to go back to your GP. And the GP that he saw at that time said, tell me what's been happening to you. She listened. She said, right, before we do anything else, we need to do a blood test. Now, when we went back 4 days later, she said that what she'd actually been looking for was myeloma, because he talked about having pain in his bones. But because she'd seen from his records that he'd never had a PSA test, she ran a PSA test as well. The myeloma came back negative, but the PSA level was over 200. I mean, despite the fact that several of our friends have been diagnosed with prostate cancer, men don't talk to each other particularly. So we knew they'd been diagnosed with prostate cancer. They'd not really, I think, understood how they'd got to it either. So suggesting that Andrew went for a PSA test had never happened to him. And it came out of the blue. It came out of the blue. When he was diagnosed, he was just extremely shocked. And it's like anything else, you get a cancer diagnosis, and I was sitting in the surgery with him, it's like a white noise that comes over you because all you can hear is the word cancer. But he was more concerned, I think, about his family, about me, about our daughters, about his grandchildren. So he was very emotional to start off with. I think also quite emotional because, of course, the treatment for him was hormone therapy, and that can make you very emotional. But what he wanted to do more than anything was to have quality time with the time that he got left. And once he got his head round having prostate cancer, then that was what he decided we would do. For me, it was a journey we went together. So every appointment we went together. Every time we came out of an appointment, we talked about what it meant, what would happen. And actually, I think it brought us really close together, because we did talk a lot about it and really wanted the best for our family. When Andrew died and we held his funeral service, one of the things that I talked about at that was his sense of family. Family was extremely important to him. He knew he was going to leave his family behind, but he wanted to leave them with really good memories of the time that we'd spent together. And I think we managed to do that. So many men just don't know their risk. So it's important that they do understand and are aware about prostate cancer, and they do use the risk checker as a means of identifying themselves into a risk group, which means that they can go to their GP and say, I've done this test, I've done this check online, and I'd like to have a PSA test. The more awareness we raise, the more funds we can get in that funds all of that brilliant research that's been going on over the last 10 years. We're so much nearer to that screening that we haven't got at the moment, which will allow men to get that diagnosis earlier and hopefully be treated, cured, and not have that awful period that we had. I can see where we were 10 years ago when Andrew died to where we are now is 1,000,000 miles away. We've come so far.